In the shadows of the White Mountains, a forgotten warband of Rohan fell, not in battle, but in purpose. Twisted by grief, hardened by exile, they returned not as horse lords, but as something else. This is the Black Halithrim. Today I'm going to show you how I turned the standard Rohan warriors into something darker, something lost. This is a full step-by-step process for creating battle-damaged, weather-beaten miniatures that tell a story. In this version of Middle-earth, the Black Halithrim were once riders of Rohan, stationed along the southern borders near the White Mountains. After a devastating campaign against the Orc tribes in the deep Incoom, they were left stranded, presumed dead. Cut off from the Riddermark, they survived, but at a cost. Years passed, their honour corroded, their blades rusted, and what came back was a silent host, more ghost than man. To sell the story visually, I started with physical damage. Using a hobby knife and an old airbrush needle, I gouged into the shields, scraped the armour, and cut the edges off the cloaks to simulate old battlefield damage. I added cheesecloth to some of the cloaks using Mod Podge. This creates the look of worn repairs, like the warriors have patched their gear up dozens of times using scavenged cloth and leather. Next, I applied Typhus Corrosion by Citadel, mainly around the lower cloaks, boots, weapons and the shield edges. This adds instant texture and gives that dirty, gritty base layer to build on. Once dry, I primed the entire warband black, setting the tone for a grim, desaturated palette. All the paints for this project are Vallejo, and for the base coats, I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of what I used. For the cloaks, I used Cayman Green, a deep, faded forest tone. Leather areas was burnt red, adds age and worn leather look. For the cloth elements, a neutral grey made by mixing black and white, and also I did the boots in pure black. For the skin, I used deck tan, pale and ghostly, like they lived underground. Wood, for the weapons, shields, I used dark rust. For the hair, I used sun yellow or dark rust again, either to give me yellow or brown hair. For the metals, I used dark gunmetal for the blades, the helmet and the shield edges. For the handles, I used tinny tin, and for weapon straps and shield elements, I used gory red, subtle but very striking. Once the base colours were down, I used oil washes to tie everything together. First, I applied a mix of burnt umber with a little bit of sap green, and this was to create a unifying wash, and I used it across the whole model, avoiding the skin. This will create a unifying wash that I'll use across the whole model, but avoiding the skin, as I want that to come through more ghostly. Then I use the reductive method. This involves cotton buds, one end damp with the thinner and the other end dry. And then I use it to pull back the wash from the raised areas to create a naturally grimy look. To make the skin look rough and weathered, I added a thin violet oil wash in the shadows for a bruised, sunken effect. It's very subtle, but I think it's quite effective. At the feet, cloaks and lower armour, I built up a more grimy effect using a thicker burnt umber oil wash. Then I used the reductive method again to feather it back up the cloaks to simulate the sort of grime build up and the mud as they were wading through whatever they come across on the battlefield. Back to rust, I reapplied Typhus Corrosion onto the silver metals. Then I followed it with a homemade rust wash of orange with a small amount of burnt umber, and that went over all the areas I did with the Typhus Corrosion. It just gives it that very subtle rust look. I used the reductive technique again to expose the sharp edges on the weapons and also a few bits across the metal areas. I used Fresh Corrosion Technical Paint by TT Combat. This was added with an old brush just to give it a bit more of a natural sort of rust look to it. For any of the copper elements, I added a touch of Vertigris Effect Paint, just enough to suggest age without overpowering the model. Then I used some Vallejo silver, and this was added to all the metal areas, not a lot, just like sparingly on the blades and a bit on the shields, just to act like new chipped metal underneath the old rust and weathered look. For extra environmental detail, I used Army Painter's Ghillie Dew speed paint to simulate algae, and I applied this onto the lower cloaks, the leather, and all the wood elements across the miniature. For dried blood, I mixed Citadel's Blood for the Blood God with a hint of Grimdark speed paint. This gave a realistic, darkened gore effect that I applied to the weapons and across the shields. The final highlight I'm going to do is using Vallejo Ivory, and this is going to highlight the skin because some of the washes could have stained it, so we want to bring that bright white ghostly skin back because it's the main feature of these miniatures that's going to really make them stand out. For the hair, I took cotton buds dyed with dark wood and Ancient Honey Army Painter speed paint. Let this dry for a good 20 minutes to half hour. I didn't wait as long, which gave me a little bit of trouble because some of the paint was still wet. Once that's done, pull out the strands and glue them to the head using Mod Podge. It gives it a wild, overgrown look that adds to the untamed vibe. For the bases, I applied Mod Podge and dipped them into some Geek Gaming Scenics base ready mix. This gives it some natural textures to match their environment. Once it was dry, I painted the rim black for a clean framed finish. And with that, the Black Halithrim are complete, a forgotten warband of Rohan, broken by war, reforged in silence, and now walking the only path of ruin. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this project, hit like and subscribe. I'll be doing more narrative paint throughs, weathering guides, and lore driven modelling soon. Drop a comment if you've got your own twisted take on a faction. I'd love to see it. Until next time, keep your blades rusty and your cloaks tattered.